Concern is right now, an increasing concern lately is about food. The packaged food that you eat, is it safe or not? And it all emanated from a recent report that came in on account of presence of added sugar in infant food. Thereafter, there is a lot of activism which is taking place online and consumer awareness which is up as well. Speaking of added sugar and unhealthy products in so-called healthy drinks like Bonvita, Horlicks, etc., all of that. And most recently, we got some news coming in from regulators in both Hong Kong and Singapore against some of our spice makers too. So we just thought it's best to discuss more on the regulations, safety, and get an answer on whether packaged food is safe in India or not, and what are Indian regulations versus the world. Clean labeling, all these factors. We have a very interesting panel to discuss with all of us today. We have Suhasini Sampath, who's the founder of Yogabar, which sold to ITC. She's joining us virtually, and in our studio we have Shashank Mehta, who's the founder and CEO of the Whole Truth Foods, and Ashwin Bhadri, who's the founder of Equinox Labs, a laboratory that tests food products, works with both regulators and consumer companies as well. Thanks a lot, lady and gentlemen, for joining in. The first question really is, what is really the reason for companies to not put clean items in their food? Because why would any company want to put things which are not good for people in their products? Morally, this is just not a question that one should be taking. And at the same time, the regulators, what's good for you versus what's legal, there is a bit of a dissonance out there, right? So what are your thoughts on this, Shashank?
Well, I'd start by saying that India is a very large, complex market, and as we keep saying, it's a very price conscious, also low price market. A very large volume of packaged food is sold under the price point of say rupees 10 or 20, right? So a large part of the reason of using chemicals, preservatives, etc. lies A, in price, and B, in wide distribution, because we have over 1 crore kirana outlets in rural areas where stock has to reach and sell from. So you need shelf life for 15 months, 20 months, and you need a price of 10 rupees. Achieving that with real food is really, really tough. And chemicals become the answer to doing that, to preservation, to reducing price. You don't want to put real blueberries, put blueberry flavor in your food. You don't want to use real cocoa, put chocolate flavor in your food. So I think that's primarily the reason why companies use chemicals in their food.
Okay. Well, Ashwin, I'm going to get you in on this because it's very interesting in terms of what's happened with the entire spices issue. It's not the first time that Everest and MDH have been in the dock. Correct. They have been pulled up by the US FDA for the possibility of salmonella containing substances in their spices, and now they've been pulled up by Hong Kong and Singapore as well. What do you think went wrong in the supply chain? Do you think that it was the process that went wrong and it was an oversight? Or do you think that they need to pull up their socks and something is definitely going wrong in the supply chain? So
in the current issue of ETO or ethylene oxide, the challenge is ethylene oxide is it's a substance that's used for sterilization of spices. Until there is no ban on it, it's going to continue to be used because it's very cost effective, right? The problem with ethylene oxide is if it's not treated properly, remnants of it can stay in the product, which is exactly what happened this time. So this is not the first container of spices that has gone abroad with ethylene oxide. Till now, tens of thousands of containers have gone. Either nobody has checked it or they were okay. This time, somebody did check it and they were not okay. But
I think it's beyond permissible limits.
It is beyond permissible
limits. Because Singapore, Hong Kong do allow it for use in pesticides.
Correct.
But obviously, they went beyond that limit.
Correct. So now what happens with something like ETO? In this case, I will be honest, I wouldn't blame the brand because let's say I'm the brand, right? I supplied something, now there's a third party that's doing my ETO for me. And then it's getting supplied to you in a different country. Now, the responsible thing to do would be, I need to double check and see, is the level there or not? But now since you're giving it to a third party, you're assuming that they are doing what they're supposed to do, right? So in this case, a lot of weightage will fall back on the third party, but I think it also falls in the regulators, that what regulations are allowed. The penalties for this have to be a little harsher. The enforcement of the law has to be a little better, right? Because today, if I am the guy doing ETO treatment and nobody's catching my neck, why would I spend money on testing and checking? And things that way. I'll just do what I have to do it fast, do it quick. And many a times the challenge comes, jaldi karo, container has to go, or instead of doing it for X amount of time, you do it faster. Processes are not controlled. Now, when processes don't get controlled, things can go wrong.
All right, makes sense. Let's welcome Suhasini as well. Suhasini, I just wanted your thoughts on the entire regulatory space itself. Ashwin said that regulations have to be harsher, punishments have to be stricter, checks have to be harder as well. Well, it seems good in spirit, but in letter, usually this can also be used to, threaten a lot of people who are there in the packaged food industry. What do you make of your experience with the regulators so far in India? At the same time, there is a dissonance between regulatory standards for India versus a lot other countries as well. Where do you think we move from here?
So, thanks for having me over, Mangalam. And I see this issue as slightly different, to what most people would actually kind of consider as where the regulators are going wrong. I think there are three issues primarily. One is misleading advertisement. And I think you need to have a stronger body that kind of controls what we are advertising to our consumers. The role of state is always going to be to protect the interests of the consumer, right? So just like you have, a board that looks at films, you need to look at what are companies telling their consumers. Can a company actually call itself a healthy product? What are the laws and regulations between calling somebody a healthy product, right? Like, for example, in the US, you had something called, a product could only be Smart Snack approved. So it's healthy for a child if it has less than 20% sugar, it has more than 30% protein. I think those regulations need to be ironed out. I don't think where large companies are going wrong is what they're showing in the nutrition label or in their ingredients. I think those regulations are uniform all across the world. I think where things need to be tighter is how are you advertising? Is there a sort of censor board to what companies can actually tell consumers, right? I think also the consumer forums are a lot more litigious in the US. I think companies are scared to kind of misrepresent to consumers because obviously litigation is a real threat to existence of companies, right? So, and I don't think India consumer activism in terms of litigation has really picked up, and that would keep companies in check. The third thing, Mangalam, and this is a pet peeve for me, right? I don't think certain substances should be allowed on the label. I don't think the problem is what is shown on the label. I think the larger problem is what is being allowed. Like very recently, there was the largest breakfast cereal manufacturer who used a preservative that is cancerous, right? What is not good for the rest of the world is not good for India. So I feel the regulations need to be tighter on actually three things. What is being advertised? What are we defining as health norms and what people can term as health? And third, what are the things that you will definitely keep out of a label? I think if we have some stronger framework around these three things, we will see consumers actually benefit in the long term.
Well, Shashank, I just want to take that point forward because the fact is that we don't have consumer activism. If you see the US, we have consumer activism against all the products which could have a possible human carcinogen. Yeah. Here, there are reports of ghee being contaminated, possibly honey, bread, sanitary pads. The list goes on. And it just it's reported, but there's no active steps taken to reform that. Yeah. So from that perspective, do you think that there needs to be an overhaul in the domestic FMCG market when it comes to regulations and when it comes to, forget consumer activism, regulations to ensure there is stricter norms followed?
Actually, I want to also, first empathize with the FSSAI. Yeah. Think of the challenge that they have on their hand, right? We are a country of over 1 crore food sellers, from street vendors to big companies. And it's a country where in rural India, the problem is of undernourishment. In urban India, the problem is of overnourishment. We are obese, right? Correct. Imagine trying to create a law that caters to all of us, right? So the regulator does something in the middle, and hence the onus falls on companies to follow the law in spirit, not just in letter, right? Even in the recent cases, I'm sure the statements put out by the companies are, hey, we are compliant to the law, right? So I think the regulator has a very, very tough job on their hands, and hence consumer activism is a very important pillar of this ecosystem also. Thankfully, there are people who are now doing it. But I think companies, especially the ones who are saying that we are catering to urban India, to new age India, also need to take the onus to follow the law in spirit, not just in letter.
But do you think there should be an overhaul in regulations, make it stricter?
Yes, I agree. There should be. And we should break it down into, in the recent reports that we see, in the protein powder report was about blatant lying, right? Like there are people who are saying it has 24 grams, but it has 15. That's blatant lying. And that should get caught through harsher regulations for sure, right? But then there is the infant cereal report, which is of double standards,
right?
Where the company is saying we are compliant to law. And I do believe that the law is where it is because of the divide that I spoke of, that, FSSAI is also thinking, how do I make this a product which solves India's problem, not just urban India's?
Maybe a solution to that then would be different products for different people and different brands at different price points as well, like you spoke about. But I'll come back to you on that. This morning we spoke with the management of Tata Consumer on the same. They too have a lot of packaged food and a lot of dairy-based additives, etc., that they've recently added to their portfolio. We asked him about this regulatory risk itself, law versus the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and this is what he had to say. We'll listen into Sunil D'Souza and we'll come back to our discussion here.
Jump shifting the volume growth in India, specifically focus on beverages. Salt, I think we've always maintained about 5% will be the secular long-term growth in volume. We're at 4%, so almost there. The growth businesses, we've said now with Capital Foods and organic coming in would be 30% of the portfolio, delivering a 30% growth, I think focusing on that. We've said 15% EBITDA is par now. We've got to improve from there. We've got to continue to improve our working capital days. We've said double-digit top-line growth and EBITDA ahead of the top line. ROCE, actually, last year was a very pleasing figure. Last quarter, we upped by 380 bips, continuing to work on that number.
I will try and get in the conversation that he had specifically with regards to food regulators in just a bit. But Shashank, the question here, like you said, India is a value-conscious market.
Yeah.
India is a big market. And at the same time, clean labeling is expensive.
Yeah.
How is this good business then? I mean, everyone in spirit wants the best products at the best prices. They have to be fresh. How do companies like Nestle, Tata, and all the others who are there in the space navigate through this? Because is clean labeling really a good business? Because you can sell a product at a much higher price, still incur a loss. There is lack of availability of products. There is lack of availability of quality ingredients.
Yeah.
And the shelf space is very limited. How is this good for business?
Usually important to do things are difficult. It's the right thing to do. I think there is a large and growing market that can afford higher prices, that is willing to pay money for the right ingredients for clean products because they see the value in it. Yeah, I think starting there rather than worrying about making something for everyone all the time is the place where all companies need to think of. And as we were talking about, both regulation as well as products maybe need to get split into which audience are we talking about. And what are we optimizing for?
Then again, that becomes double standards, right? Because at the end of the day, what is happening with developed markets versus emerging markets is the same thing which is happening in India, where there is a developed market economy in India itself, along with an emerging market economy. I just want Suhasini's thoughts on this. Suhasini, you started out as a clean label company. Thereafter, you sold to a large company as well. How are you trying to maintain the ethos of your products as it scales up and as it goes to a wider distribution reach, trying to become more accessible? How do you do that?
Yeah. So Mangalam, I'm going to answer both questions actually, right? I actually think, and I'll give you perspective, in personal care companies, the first ingredient is water and it sells at 2 rupees a gram. And compare that to Yogabar product where, your first ingredient is almond and you're selling at 1 rupee a gram. So we are talking like it is very, very difficult to maintain gross margins for a health food company. And then that was largely the reason to also sell, right? Because obviously, at least the strength of distribution, you're not actually having to invest in distribution. And you rectify your gross margin as time progresses. But we've seen like recently millet prices increasing, cocoa prices increasing, etc. So the issue is real, and there is the hope that as consumers become more and more educated, they will pay that premium in price, but we're not seeing that yet. And to your second question, Yogabar continues to operate as an independent company. At this point of time, ITC is like a venture capital investor with the additional benefit of having given us very strong distribution. And we don't have to bear that distribution cost. It comes as a fixed cost. So we are launching as beautiful products as we always have. We've recently forayed into baby foods, like we're doing ancient millets, etc. And luckily, there's a lot of government support coming in. Like even though the millet prices have increased, the government has given us a grant which kind of circumvents the increase in price. So it's interesting times for us, and we are rushing to kind of develop all of these really good products, continue to fight the good fight,
sure.
Before we hand it over to ITC in 3 years.
So, Suhasini, you mentioned baby food, so I'm just going to ask you a very technical question. How much sugar actually goes into the baby food? How much is permissible? And what are the Indian regulations when it comes to that? And are companies flouting this norm?
Yeah. So I'll answer that question. And we are definitely a company that, kind of manufactures thinking about my kid first, right? And I never, gave my kids sugar or salt for 1.5 years. And we've continued to, use that even in the products that we manufacture. So we do ragi, we do oats, etc. And we do it with zero sugar. Like zero sugar means purely just millets or oat mixes. And that is the internal mandate for us. Our company checklist is it good enough for my kid? And only then is it good enough for everybody else, right? The permissible sugar actually for an infant, salt and sugar is zero. Like you do not want to develop taste buds for your child, where a child is dependent on either of these two things, because those taste habits is what, develops into adult food eating habits, right? I think Nestle has, maybe I shouldn't take names. The sugar content in Cerelac products are not good for children. That is the honest truth of it. Are they following norms? Are they following regulations? Absolutely yes, because it's not mandated anywhere in FSSAI what should be the sugar level in infant food. So they are right as per the law. They are following the law. Sure. Is it something they would give their kids? Probably not.
All right.
Okay, all right. So Hasni, Ashwin, as well as Shashank, it's been a very enlightening conversation, and I'm sure we'll probably touch base for more detailed conversations as we go along. Thanks very much.
The start of many such conversations. The good part is that it has started right now. Importantly, also from a investor standpoint, a lot of people who invest in a lot of these startups who promise clean labeling, etc., the kind of valuations that they are investing in these companies, they expect a fair amount of growth, which may at some point make some of these investee companies fudge something to go ahead and give the growth to them. So that is a conversation that we should have from that perspective as well at some point in time.
I just want to point out that, you did mention obesity and the two worlds that India lives in and packaged food. The Medicine Box has spoken just about this issue that India faces in terms of obesity in children. And I think that all of this is very well connected. So maybe we can catch that as well.
That's a great plug.
Viewers can catch that as well. We need to take a short break. But Dharmesh Shah of ICICI Direct will join in with his trading strategy. Stay tuned.